Hi everyone, my name is Jackie Berknes-Gartman. I'm a GI and liver pathologist at Johns Hopkins, and today I'm going to be discussing an unusual variant of gastric adenocarcinoma. So today I'm showing you a biopsy from a gastric mass. We can see that we have multiple fragments here. There are some areas that appear to be background gastric mucosa, and then we have this very blue appearing cellular proliferation in several of these tissue fragments. So let's go to higher magnification to look at these fragments here. So zooming in here, I see that I am in fact in the gastric mucosa, so I can see my gastric glands here. I don't see any parietal cells, so most likely I'm located in the antrum. And as I go to the top of this piece of tissue, I can start to see our neoplastic cells. So I have this sheet-like proliferation of cells that have some degree of pleomorphism, meaning cells that look different one cell to the next. I can see that some of these are infiltrating around some of the existing benign glands. And I can also start to see that there is an associated lymphoid infiltrate where I have all of these tiny little lymphocytes that are infiltrating between these neoplastic cells. So let's look at this in some of our other tissue fragments. Here we have a larger fragment that has the same neoplastic cells. So again, I can see that these are malignant appearing cells that have pleomorphism and a high nuclear to cytoplasmic ratio, and this really striking lymphoid infiltrate throughout this tumor. So the first thing I would think about is this a carcinoma or is this some other type of neoplasm? And whenever I have something very poorly differentiated, I want to think about poorly differentiated carcinoma as well as lymphoma, melanoma, sarcoma. So one of the first things that I often do in these cases is a keratin to help me figure out if this is epithelial or not. And in this case, this turned out to be strongly keratin positive. If I am really not sure if this is carcinoma or not initially, I may do a panel with S100 and CD45 in addition. So I would expect those to be negative in this neoplasm, which does turn out to be a carcinoma. So then my next decision point is what type of carcinoma this is. And I don't really see great glandular formation. I mean, I have some admixed background glands, but in the neoplasm itself, I don't really see any glandular formation. But it also doesn't look squamous. It doesn't particularly look neuroendocrine, although I suppose that would be a possibility. But really the hint to the diagnosis here is this really striking lymphoid infiltrate that I mentioned before. So this is an example of gastric carcinoma with lymphoid stroma, which is also called lymphoepithelioma-like carcinoma, or it can also be called medullary carcinoma. And in the stomach, this is associated with two different things. One is EBV infection, and the other is microsatellite instability. And interestingly, this tends to be mutually exclusive, so it can be associated with one or the other, but not both. So in this case, I did MMR stains, and this had intact labeling for MLH1, PMS2, MSH2, and MSH6, suggesting that it's microsatellite stable. However, I did an EBV in situ hybridization stain, and this is nicely positive in our neoplastic cells. So here our tissue is flipped around a bit from the last slide, but we can take that with a grain of salt. But here we see our neoplastic cells, and they're nicely labeling for EBV with this blue stain here. So this is an example of an EBV-associated gastric carcinoma with lymphoid stroma. So there's a couple reasons why it's important to make this diagnosis. One, of course, we want to get this into the adenocarcinoma category and not end up in a different category. The other is that these, whether they are microsatellite unstable or whether they're EBV associated, tend to respond well to immunotherapy. So that will open up a treatment option for this patient. So again, this is an example of an unusual type of gastric adenocarcinoma, which is gastric carcinoma with lymphoid stroma. And this particular case was EBV associated. And that's our case today. Thank you for listening.